Okay, so the balance of payments and looking at current accounts as well in particular, a really hated part of the specification for most students, but it's not that difficult, and it's really good to learn about because it comes up in your A2 exams as well. How can I get that? There we go. Go away. Right, so this is what we need to know. The balance, be able to define the balance of payment, show an awareness in trends of the current account, understand the government objectives, all straightforward, structure of the current account and the balance of payments, straightforward again, explain the causes of a deficit of a surplus, discuss the consequences of a deficit of a surplus. These last three ones have been done in the exchange rate presentation, so have a look at that for those specification objectives. Okay, so just a bit of an introduction. This is quite old data, but a nice article I got from The Guardian about where UK imports come from. So what kind of where are we getting our imports from? And kind of it's looking at growth from 2008 to 2009 as well. So where are most of them coming from? It's the one with the biggest line is where most of them, it seems like Germany, most of our imports coming from. Amazing. I definitely wouldn't have thought that. It'd be interesting to see what it is now. Maybe you could kind of Google and see The Guardian, whether it's import. I imagine China's a bit bigger than that now. And then what type of things we're buying. Lots of cars. Not that surprising, is it? We're importing a lot from Germany and they tend to be cars. But lots of other things as well. And then what we're exporting, most of it going to the US. Be interesting to see if that's still the case. But you can see just when the recession's hitting, because there's been a decline in a fall in the amount we're exporting to the US from 2008 to 2009, and then the type of products that we're selling to them. What my students find really interesting is that they tend to be quite similar products that we're importing and exporting, and that's part of the A2 that we look at. Why does that happen? And it's because people can buy products from wherever they want, really. You don't have to buy British-made cars, do you? We've got a big private sector in the UK, and people make private decisions about them. But it's interesting, we don't just import products that we don't produce in the UK. So that gets onto some interesting questions about specialisation. But wider than the specification at this point. So what is the balance of payments? It's really basic. It's just a record of the money that's flowing in and out of a country each year. And I've written it, this kind of makes it look a bit funny. So I've written it down here on the whiteboard, but it's the balance of payments is your current account plus your capital and financial account. Now these should equal each other, but our economy is big and sometimes there are little errors made and you forget things. Well, not forget things, but you don't have the data for them. So they should equal each other. They don't always, so we put a little balancing figure in and it should equal 0. But what you need to really know about is the current account. That's what we're looking at. A2, look at capital and financial account a little bit, but it's current account that we're looking at for AS. So the current account equals the trading goods, which is just what you export minus what you import, plus your trading services, what you export minus what you import, plus net income. Now net income is just income from investments that you've made abroad. So maybe if we own some factories abroad and that company makes a profit, that's your investment income from abroad, minus any foreigner who owns a UK business and makes profit from that and is taking the profits back home. And transfer payments. Transfer payments are just the movement of money from one country to another. It's not earned income. So these things would have been earned. So maybe people sending money home, those types of things. Just a few more definitions for you. Visible balance is just the trading goods, and the invisible balance is the trading services. So those Guardian graphs that I showed you right at the beginning, this is the visible balance. So it's not this doesn't represent the whole of our current account, because firstly it's just showing what we import in terms of goods and what we export in terms of goods. So it doesn't include services, but it also doesn't include investment, and it doesn't include or net investment, sorry, net income and net transfers either. So it only includes that top part. So we couldn't say it represents the current account. Sometimes as well, we just look at the trade balance, and when we're looking at the trade balance, it just means trading goods and trading services, and they're forgetting those other things. But in the UK, by far, these are the bigger things, and that's actually bigger than services. But so sometimes people just look at the trade balance rather than those two things. But technically speaking, net income and net transfers are included in the current account. So this is old data, but this is what it adds up to. So we've got a minus figure on exports of goods and imports of goods. I think I've given students these values before, and they're obviously, oh, here we go. And we've got a positive figure for exports of services minus import of services, so we're doing pretty well on those. We've got a negative figure on the net income, and a negative figure on transfers. But you can see it's by far these two are the bigger. It's quite big actually, 23. Well, I'm not going to say that 2.2 billion is a small amount, like a drop in the ocean, but it's a drop in the ocean compared to these bigger figures here. And that comes out as a negative figure. And what does that mean? Well, it means we're in a deficit. So just to point out this, students often get mixed up with these terms. Deficit just means it's in a negative, and surplus just means it's in a positive figure at the end. So don't get, it's not called a current account deficit. The deficit just describes the state the current account is in. This becomes important later on in the spec, because students get mixed up with fiscal deficits and current account deficits, and they're completely different things. So when we're looking at the current account, we're looking at trade, really, and the movement of money in and out of a country. Whereas if we're looking at fiscal, we're looking at government spending and taxation. Anyway, back to current account deficits. So a current account deficit is where you get a negative at the end. So unfortunately, we have a current account deficit, but it's either caused by, well, it's more money leaving the country than entering it, and it's as a result of maybe your exports, income, and current transfers from abroad being less than imports, income, and current transfers from abroad. And if you had a positive figure, it would be a surplus, so that's more money entering the country than leaving it, I should say leaving it, as a result of the sale of its exports, income, and current transfers from abroad being more than imports, income, and current transfers going abroad. If I wouldn't learn the whole definition, I'd just learn it up to that point there. So current account deficit, when more money is leaving the country than entering it. Current account surplus, when more money is entering the country than leaving it, not leaning it, obviously. So a little bit you can read in the textbook about the structure of the current account of the balance of payments, but I've just been through that stuff. So what causes a deficit on the current account? So we know we've got a deficit, but what kind of things have caused it? So it's basically, it's where your exports are smaller than your imports. Okay, so maybe that's caused by your products being a bit rubbish. So structural reasons down here. So uncompetitive exports. Maybe your exports are quite expensive. Maybe imports are really competitive, so they're really good value. So they're quite cheap compared to your domestically produced products, and they're quite good quality as well. So I'm thinking of Germany and their cars, their lovely cars. And do we make any cars in the UK that are actually British-owned cars? No, I don't. I'm not big. Nothing that kind of is like the equivalent of like VW, like, you know, that kind of mid-range kind of expense. Maybe get more niche markets. But anyway, a change in the income abroad can also affect or cause a current account deficit. So if incomes abroad fall, so they've got a recession, then demand for exports are going to fall as well. A change in incomes at home can cause a deficit as well. So if we have a boom, our incomes are going up, we are going to be buying more of all types of goods. Now, we don't buy our own exports. When we buy our own products that are produced in the UK, we call that domestic production. We're buying domestic production. We don't call it buying exports. So we buy domestic production, but we can also buy imports. So that might mean that your imports are larger than your exports. And a change in the exchange rate as well can cause a current account deficit. So spice, strong pounds, imports cheap, exports dear, would mean the demand for imports would increase and demand for exports would decrease. So lots of reasons why you could get a deficit. What could cause a surplus? Well, you could just reverse all of those things, couldn't you? You could say, well, a depreciation of your exchange rate, or a boom abroad. So we've got lots of demand for our exports. I'm sure I've got these things. So yeah, a boom abroad, depreciation of your exchange rate, a recession at home, which wouldn't be very nice for the economy. But there'd be less demand for imports. So it's always a silver lining, I suppose. And then structural reasons as well. So maybe our products are really good and they're really competitive and they're reasonable prices, and so we get lots of demand for our exports. Okay, consequences of a surplus or a deficit. So economic growth, consequences of a surplus. So it increases aggregate demand. I'm going to show you this on a slide in a second. But if you just go with this at this point, it increases aggregate demand, so we get increasing growth or real GDP. Current account deficit should decrease AD, so decrease in real GDP, so negative growth maybe. So it shouldn't really say increases growth, it should say increases real GDP, therefore is growth. Inflation increases AD, so you might get demand pull inflation. Decreases AD for a current account deficit, so that should be quite deflationary effect on your economy. All of these are kind of depends upon, because it also depends upon what's happening to your C and your I and your G as well. And unemployment, because it increases growth when we have a current account surplus, it should, we have more demand for our exports, it should mean that we have more demand for workers as well. So it increases employment, reduces unemployment, and a current account deficit should moving into a current account deficit should mean that the fewer workers needed to produce exports because demand for exports is reduced, and therefore you get an increase in unemployment, reduction in employment. But here it is on a diagram, so an increasing deficit or a decreasing surplus means that it's, really looking at the trade balance here, and that X minus M on the end of your AD equation. So AD reducing, we've got deflation here, more likely to be disinflation to be honest, but deflation here and reduction in real GDP. And it's either caused by a reduction in your exports or an increase in the imports, or both occurring at the same time. And a deficit, so a decreasing deficit or an increasing surplus, has the opposite effect there. So we get inflation, we get an increase in real GDP, which is known as economic growth. Okay, so that's all very straightforward for students to learn about. But something like you depend upon, you comment on questions, you need to look at the significance of current account deficit. So, oh my gosh, look at USA, such a big current account deficit there, 470 billion. I believe all these figures are in dollars. Wow. So when you get a negative figure, it means they're in deficit. When you get positive, it means they're in deficit. Wow, look at that surplus China have got. So yeah, really, really big. But the thing is, China is a much bigger country than Qatar, whereas, the USA is a much bigger country than the UK. So yeah, we'd kind of expect their deficit to be a bit bigger, when we're measuring them. And look at Zimbabwe's deficit, actually quite small, but they're actually a really small economy. So when we look at it as a percentage of GDP, okay, USA's deficit looks looks really large, but if we measure it as a percentage of GDP, well, 3.2%, it's actually the same as the UK's in 2010. Wow, look at Zimbabwe, is absolutely huge. Wow, look at Qatar's surplus, absolutely huge when you compare it to China, but the absolute figures are tell a different story. So what we really need to do is measure it as a percentage of GDP. The other dependent upon factor is it depends what it's been caused by. So if it's been caused by an exchange rate movement, oh, it's not that worrying, to be honest, because it should actually sort itself out in the end, with a freely floating exchange rate, that is. Anyway, but if it's caused by a structural problem, as in your products are rubbish, nobody wants to buy them, that's serious. That's really serious. And by rubbish, I mean uncompetitive, you've got low productivity, those types of things. And your duration of your deficit as well. So deficit is just measuring the money, record of the money flows in and out of your economy, or sorry, the current account, and the balance payments is the record of the money flows in and out of the economy over a year. So it doesn't accumulate it past a year. So these are all 2010 figures. So it's like, well, I suppose it's not that bad, Zimbabwe, but what happened in 2009, what happened in 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15? And if it was getting worse, if it was getting better, you know, that would be more kind of significant as well. So that's all of the specification objectives. So define the balance of payments, record of the money flowing in and out of a country. Awareness in the trends of the current account. We haven't actually done that, but we've had a deficit since around about, I think it's 98, 99, 97, round about that time, round about the time you were probably born. The UK's been running a really big deficit, and it's mainly because of importing more goods than exporting. The government objectives in terms of the balance of payments, quite complicated. All we want to achieve is a satisfactory balance of payments position. It's very vague. I should, give them a U grade for that, the UK government, and say it's too vague. I would if a student gave that answer in an essay, but put that down, because that's satisfactory balance of payments position. The structure of the current account of balance payments, trading goods plus trading services plus net income plus net transfers. Explain the causes of a deficit of surplus, lots of stuff, so go back to the slide for that one. And the consequences of deficit of surplus depend upon the size as measured as a percentage of GDP. It depends upon the duration and depends upon the cause of the deficit or the surplus.